Welcome to the 42nd Annual San Francisco Bay Area Day of Remembrance. This year's theme is Abolition, Reparations, Carrying the Light for Justice. Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Fukami, one of your co-MCs this evening. I'm a documentary filmmaker and born and raised in San Francisco. As children, my father and his family were incarcerated at the Topaz Relocation Center. My mother and her family at the Gila concentration camp in Arizona and the Tule Lake Segregation Center in Northern California.
Hi, I'm Hillary Nakano. My grandparents were imprisoned at Tule Lake, Gila, and Topaz. And if you didn't know and couldn't tell from the uncanny resemblance, Diane is my mom. Although we do have different last names in case you do know my mom and don't like her. I'm a board member of the Japanese Community Cultural Center of Northern California, and I'm the co-chair of Japantown for Justice. Japantown for Justice, also known as J4J, is a coalition of young San Francisco Japantown leaders working locally in Japantown and the Fillmore District to promote economic and cultural sovereignty. Since our inception in May 2020, we've planned and organized a peaceful art and activism event on Juneteenth, 2 District 5 supervisor candidate forums, a voter guide, and the bi-weekly Fillmore Marketplace, which is an opportunity for Black small-owned business owners who have been severely impacted by the pandemic to safely sell their merchandise. As members of J4J, we like to think that our work embodies today's DOR theme.
Commemorating the Day of Remembrance forces us to remember February 19th, 1942, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 96-6. That led to the removal and incarceration of Japanese Americans from the West Coast during World War II. 120,000 people were imprisoned behind barbed wire. As we celebrate a new presidential administration and look toward the future, we need to remember there's still much work to be done. Abolition, reparations, carrying the light for justice honors shared history between the Japanese American and African American communities and the ties that bind us.
Our community knows full well the meaning of the word reparations. It was a decades-long battle, but in 1988, the Civil Liberties Act was signed, and those incarcerated Japanese Americans received a government apology and a redress check to help make amends for their imprisonment in American concentration camps during World War II. The definition of the word reparations is the making of amends for a wrong one has done by paying money to or otherwise helping those who have been wronged. How can we support our African American brothers and sisters in their quest for reparations? One way is to start by remembering our shared history and shared community. In neighborhoods across America, when our communities were unwelcome in many parts of cities, Japanese Americans and Black families live side by side.
We're privileged this evening to introduce our keynote speaker for this 42nd Day of Remembrance. The Reverend Arnold Townsend is a familiar figure in Japantown and the Fillmore District. He's an activist in San Francisco's African American community. He's board president of both the Economic Opportunity Council of San Francisco and the African American Art and Cultural Complex of San Francisco. And he's a vice president of the San Francisco NAACP. He's also assistant pastor at Without Walls International Ministries. He joins us now to remind us of the historic ties between our two communities and how we must fight together to carry the light for justice.
Good day, and it is indeed an honor and a pleasure for me to be with you today. I am excited to begin a conversation that we hope will be one of long-standing and one that will bear much fruit. I am well aware of what the day February 19th means in the Japanese community, and I'm well aware of what it should mean in the United States of America. But in the United States, we have a problem. We tend to try to forget or ignore all of the glitches and all of the heinous things in our history. And the problem with trying to forget those things is that it is quite apparent that they can be repeated as we see dishonor being repeated today. Just as there are no commemorations or official remembrances of slavery and or even the Civil War, just as there is no official remembrance by this government of what happened on February 19th, 1942. If you think about it, in in Germany, it is illegal to brandish Nazi memorabilia. Not so in this country. The Confederate flag and all those things are much in style. And someone said, why is it illegal in Germany, but not illegal in this country? And someone said, because the Germans are ashamed. In this country, there is no collective recognized shame for what we have done to other people. And that is kind of what I want to talk about today, that as people of color, how can we band together to create a national shame for the things that we have done to others simply because of the color of their skin? And when we can face up to what we've done, we can then finally, once and for all, fix what has been done in the name of patriotism or whatever other false name they've created. I am at this time, I am most reminded of, I guess it was many years ago, I attended a February 19th commemoration at the hotel in Japantown. I believe that it used to be the Miyako. I think they changed the name, or maybe it's the Miyako now. But there, I was on a panel, actually. And in the discussion, a very elderly Japanese lady said that she remembered the day they left for the camps. She said, number one, the only people who seemed to lament their leaving were Black people in the Fillmore, and that it was Black church people who showed up that day and brought them bags of food, primarily brown paper bags with grease stains from fried chicken, and shoebox cakes. Now, what's interesting about that is it's kind of a running a joke in the Black community of brown paper bags of fried chicken and shoebox cakes, because when we used to travel by car or even by rail years ago during segregation, we packed that kind of food in our cars, because once we got on the highway, we never knew when we would be able to buy some food again, because most of the restaurants that we passed up in the car would not serve us. And fried chicken will keep longer than a lot of other foods. And then the shoebox cakes were perfect because they would fit inside the shoebox. And we travel like that. And so it's really something and significant to think about those kinds of things being given to the Japanese people as they were being shipped off in the trucks and in the buses to the camps. And that speaks to a relationship that was more or less between Blacks and Japanese that was more or less naturally built amongst our people. And even after the war, when Japanese people came home, the only people that really welcomed them back home were African Americans in Japantown, because we had a long-standing relationship and because we understood the racism that caused the Japanese to be put in concentration camps. That was familiar to us, that kind of people being singled out because of who they were, because of their skin color, because of where they were born. I remember I grew up in Los Angeles, and I grew up in a neighborhood that had a lot of Japanese people in it. So I went to school with Japanese people all my life, all the way through high school. And I remember distinctly a group of my friends that hung out together. We were in elementary and junior high school, and we all lived in the same neighborhood, and the group was integrated. But I remember a friend of mine whose name was Denny, who was white, who told me that his father had physically chastised him for using the N-word. But one day we all went over to his house, and our Japanese buddy Lloyd was with us. And this same dad that loved me coming to his house told his son to get that Jap out of my damn house. This was after World War II, because of the hatred that was fostered in this country, much as the kind of hatred our last president fostered and encouraged in this day and age. And that's the problem that we have to be aware of. History does not repeat itself. History is benign. It just waits to be made. But people keep on repeating history. And until there is a reckoning in this country, an official reckoning, we're bound to repeat this kind of viciousness over and over again. And so in Japantown and the Fillmore, my Japanese friends that grew up here, they all said they were from the Fillmore. They were from Japantown too, but everybody in Japantown was from Fillmore. Not everybody in Fillmore was from Japantown. And so when we started the cause of battling redevelopment, it was a joint effort between the Black community and the Japanese community. They formed an organization like Waco, and while we can't get into the whole discussion of that now, that was how redevelopment was stopped initially in its tracks, and some changes were made to what was happening to us jointly in this community. And so we've got to begin to bring back that kind of coalition, those kinds of coalition politics, if we're going to change what is happening to us in this community and in this city, and then leading to what's happening in this country. And I think we have to remember that what February 19th really is, it's another view of what it really means to be an American. Because to be an American is not the same for everyone as it is if you're born and raised as a white person in this country. What it means to be an American if you are of color is to fight against the odds. It means that you're going to have to become successful beyond oppression, beyond racism, beyond discrimination, if you're going to be have any kind of life in this country. It is not a guarantee that no matter who you are, you have the same rights to be successful. It offers opportunity on one hand, but it offers racism, degradation, and oppression on the other. It offers the destruction of dreams, hopes, and ideals just because of how you look. And so what we've got to remember when we look at the example of the Japanese internment, when we look at slavery, we've got to understand that we have to stop saying we're better than this when we watch January 6th and when we watch children being put in cages. No, we are not better than this. This is who we are. We've been doing it we've been taking children from their parents for 400 years. We've been uprooting people and incarcerating them for 400 years. We are not better than this. We need to become better than this. But that's a dream for the future. That is not the reality or the history of who this country is. And so we can't be shocked by the insurrection of January 6th because America has been on an insurrection against the Constitution for 400 years. We have not lived up to the Constitution for everyone. And we've got to understand and make sure that our neighbors who may be white understand and not let them get away with pretending that they don't understand, that they don't know that racism and discrimination exist. America has been living a history of delusion and illusion since the first white folks landed on these shores. And that we must understand that the divide in this country is not really about Republicans or Democrats. The divide in this country is over racism. And until we accept the fact that we must cure and fix the race problem in this country, all of our other problems cannot and will not be fixed. We have to understand that it is racism that has been used to make folk successful while other folk have been totally unsuccessful in this country. It is racism that made this country adopt a trickle-down theory that has been in existence for the last 50 years. And I don't know about you, but I ain't got wet yet from the trickle down. And none of us have. Lyndon Johnson said that to be in this country, if you can convince the white man that he's better than the black man, you can steal from him all day long. But then he went on to say, but if you can convince a poor white man that he's better than the best black man, you won't have to steal from him. He'll bring the money to you. And that is the lie that the oligarchs and others of this country have used to be successful in their oppression of people of color, and to tell the truth, their oppression of poor white people, and now even white people of middle class. And so we have to be about abolition, the abolishment of racism. And we don't need because abolition means to end. I know, I looked it up. And we don't need any fancy sociological talk. We just got to end it. When I was in Cuba, they were telling us about the struggles they had to overcome the racism of the past, and that they still are working to overcome. And they said, sociologists told them, you can't legislate the heart. They said, yeah, but we can make racism illegal. We can put you in jail for it. And unless we take that approach in this country, the January 6th is not the last January 6th that we will have in this country. I wish I had time to tell you all the things that are on my heart about racism. But as a preacher, I must tell you that if we're going to correct racism, we've got to deal with reparations, because there must be a reckoning if we're going to right wrong. There has, as a preacher, I would simply say that all sin must be paid for. And that's why we say that even in his transfigured body, Jesus still had the nail prints, because sin leaves a mark. And our country is suffering from the mark that the sin of racism has left on us. And that's something that the nation must move to correct. And it has to be a national day. There is no national remembrance of the end of slavery. What we call Juneteenth, Black people created. What you call February 19th, Japanese people created. But this country has never stepped up to say we were wrong. And we're willing to pay for the wrong and that we caused other people. And here's the thing we've got to remember: as Black and people of color, period, we've got to do it. No one can do it for us. The Avengers, the folks out of Marvel Comics, are not coming to fix it for us. There's no Superman or Black Panther on the way. We've got to do it ourselves. We must be our own superheroes by working together. None of us can do it alone. And we've got to understand that what we must do is we must make an investment in the future. Dr. King and all those Fred Korematsu and all those great pioneers, they did not give their life for our freedom. They were murdered. Dr. King was murdered. They were imprisoned. They weren't. Dr. King would have loved to keep on living. All of those pioneers would have loved not to do prison time. What they did is they made an investment in us. And we have a responsibility to give them a return on their investment. That's what it's about. It's not about them sacrificing their life, but we've got to become committed to the investment and make the investment the most important part of our lives. I'm living and praying to God that my life has been an investment in the future of my children, my grandchildren, and all of the children that are to come. Now, I only have time to give you a couple of first steps. I'm over my time now, but y'all know I'm Baptist preachers. We go over a lot, but I'm trying, and I do understand the difference between a kind of lengthy sermon and a hostage situation. So I'm not trying to hold y'all hostage, but I do want to tell you that there is an African saying that says, until the lion hires a speechwriter, the story of the hunt will always be told from the perspective of the hunter. And we are the lions in this scenario, and it's time for us to start speaking. The first propaganda that this country gave out and sent around the world was racism. They had to convince white people and even some Black people and others that Blacks were only worthy of slavery. And that was the first propaganda they put out, that and that the native people in this country were only worthy of annihilation. And they've been spreading that kind of propaganda is at the seed of the success of this nation. And we've got to take control of the messaging of our own struggle. We've got to take the propaganda out of the hands of the racists and put it in our own. And so, and they've been successful because they've controlled the messaging, and they still do. They control it. They have Fox News, and we have nothing. Who puts out our message? We've got to do it. We've got to take control of our message, and that means we've also got to get some control over the education of our children. Because our children, as many people who are watching me now did, you went to school, no matter what color you were, and you may have been a 4.0 student. But did you learn the truth about your nation? I'm almost through, folks. Give me a couple of minutes. Did you learn the truth about your nation, of who your nation is? Did you learn what it means to be of color? To be of color in this society? We need to know different things. And even white children need to know, how do you survive, and how do you be fair, and how do you create a fair and just society? You're not learning that in school. You're learning to survive, but you're not learning to thrive. So we've got to decide that we're going to speak for ourselves. We're going to take control of our message, our education, and we've got to quit sending our children to our enemies to be educated. And finally, if we're going to build the beloved community that Dr. King talked about, we have to teach our children that they are responsible for that they are responsible for their own future. And it must be forged out of a great love for the people. The late revolutionary Che Guevara said, let me say, at the risk of sounding ridiculous, a true revolutionary must have a great love for the people. And finally, when it's all said and done, in 1 Corinthians it says, when it's all said and done, I'm a preacher, so y'all don't mind if I quote the Bible, I hope. It says in 1 Corinthians 13, when it's all said and done, only three things are really important: faith, hope, and love. But love is the greatest of these three. So I would say to you that if we're going to work together, let love be the prize that we strive for going forward. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Reverend Townsend, for your powerful words, and thank you for being part of our audience tonight. There are a lot of great things he said in that speech, but I think my favorite comment was, I don't know about you, but I haven't gotten wet yet from trickle-down theory. As Reverend Townsend mentioned, both Japanese Americans and African Americans have had to face many of the same kinds of struggles. Jeffrey Matsuoka joins us now to further explain the relationship between our two communities and why Japanese Americans bear the responsibility of helping in the fight for Black reparations.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Matsuoka, and I'm the chairperson of the Day of Remembrance Organizing Committee. We're very happy that you can join us online tonight on the 79th anniversary of the signing of Executive Order 9066. Tonight, we honor our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents who suffered the indignity and shame of forced removal and incarceration to concentration camps located in desolate places far away from their homes. They all knew in their hearts that what had been done to them and their families by the United States government was wrong and unjust. Yet most, not all, but most, chose to remain silent. It took a new generation of young Japanese Americans to give full voice to this injustice and strive for and eventually gain a remedy for it in the form of redress and reparations. But our redress movement could not have succeeded without the example of the Black civil rights movement of the 1960s and 70s. Japanese Americans living side by side with African Americans in the Fillmore in San Francisco had fought to save our community from the destruction of redevelopment. When our JA community sought out allies for our redress movement, we received unquestioning support from prominent African American legislators like Ron Dellums and many Black individuals and organizations, because they too understood all too well the harmful effects of racial prejudice. Now, in the age of Black Lives Matter, our committee felt it important to reaffirm our solidarity with the African American community in their struggle for reparations. This week, Congress held a hearing on H.R. 40, a bill that would create a federal commission to study the issue of reparations for African Americans. Governor Gavin Newsom recently signed AB 3121, which created a similar commission to study reparations for Black Californians. And finally, here in San Francisco, Supervisor Shimon Walton has introduced legislation supporting reparations for African American residents of the city. We all knew about the grave injustices that have been visited upon the African American community. Injustices like slavery, systematic economic dispowerment, and racial profiling. But last summer's killing of George Floyd has now given urgent voice to it throughout our nation. I believe that as descendants of American concentration camp survivors who petitioned for and gained redress from the United States government, it is our responsibility to support reparations for Black Americans. This year's theme of Abolition, Reparations, Carrying the Light for Justice speaks to the common challenges that Japanese Americans and African Americans have historically faced as people of color in America, but affirms our common resolve to seek redress for past injustices in a spirit of healing, reconciliation, and a desire to create a more perfect union for all Americans. Thank you for joining us tonight, and enjoy the rest of our program.
Thank you very much, Jeff. We'd also like to acknowledge in our audience tonight is Consul General Toru Maeda. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, through tonight's program, we're going to be showing you ways that you can support many of the causes that we're highlighting. And at the end of the program, we'll be running a video loop with all the names and contact information you've been seeing throughout the evening.
Sudo for Solidarity is an organization that has provided support for H.R. 40, the congressional study that Jeff mentioned. H.R. 40 begins the process of reparations for African Americans. In addition, Sudo continues to fight against family detention centers for immigrants. Here are some more details from Lisa Doi.
Hi, my name is Lisa Doi, and I'm grateful in this virtual setting to join you from Chicago. I also appreciate the opportunity to share reflections on Sudo for Solidarity with all of you, especially in the Bay Area, as you have been so essential in creating and supporting Sudo's work. At the start of a new presidential administration, Sudo is rolling out an action plan, not for the Biden administration, but for ourselves, articulating how we are taking action in this moment. And this plan is informed by you. From August to January, we listened to nearly 200 people in interviews, surveys, and focus groups. We launched 4 working groups to consider our priorities, and we moved to turn this vision into a plan. At our core is always immigration detention. This is the issue that we originally organized around and will always be at the heart of our work. In this moment, we believe that we can shut down the 3 family detention centers in Pennsylvania and Texas. This is not a foregone conclusion, however. The Biden administration could have shut these sites down on day 1, and they did not. But we believe that it is both possible and urgently necessary. We are working with Japanese Americans who were incarcerated as children, many of them joining us today, to speak to members of Congress about this and to share their stories. I also want to invite you to join a program on March 6th to hear from youth artists who are engaged in the issue of immigration and who are living it in detention centers and in sanctuary. You can learn more about this event on our website, sudoforsolidarity.org. In addition, last summer, with the public surge for the movement for Black lives in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, Sudo was encouraged to enter some new spaces, particularly around policing and prisons, as well as reparations. We know this is new territory for us. We know there are many organizations in the Japanese American community, but especially in the Black community, who have been leaders in these areas for a long time. And we hope to be good listeners and good supporters. At the same time, we know that Black Nikkei folks and their families are essential to our strength as a community, and the anti-Black racism is something we must grapple with as well. Our intention in this work was to move slowly and to build relationships, both inside and outside of the Japanese American community. In early February, we were asked by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas and the ACLU to support an urgent ask related to reparations. Last week, Representative Jackson Lee convened a House subcommittee hearing on H.R. 40, a bill to create a study commission like the CWRIC to examine the ongoing consequences of slavery and to offer proposals for repair. Representative Jackson Lee and the ACLU asked us, along with dozens of Japanese American organizations across the country, to gather testimony for the congressional record. Thank you to those of you who submitted testimony. As we, as a country, continue to push for this important commission, I am reminded that at the heart of H.R. 40 are questions of healing and repair. These are also essential questions for Sudo for Solidarity. I want to end with an invitation. On March 20th, Sudo for Solidarity is going to have an open meeting. We're going to share our action plan in more details, as well as ways you can get involved. Please check our website, sudoforsolidarity.org, to learn more about this program. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Sudo for Solidarity. In addition to the 2 events in March that Lisa discussed, Sudo is also accepting additional testimonial letters in support of HR 40. But the deadline is this Sunday, February 21st. If you'd like to participate, please email your letter to sudoforsolidarity@gmail.com. We will also have a listing of all organization websites and contact links at the end of our program, and we'll post the information on the Facebook page and the website of the National Japanese American Historical Society.
And for those of you who asked if this recording, and especially Reverend Townsend's message, will be recorded, yes, it will. And it will live on the website of NJAS, or the National Japanese American Historical Society. So we'll also be conveying that information later on as well.
Next, we'd like to introduce you to Ito Yosakoi, a community program based in San Francisco, Japantown, at the Japanese Cultural and Community Center of Northern California. This group was founded in January 2017.
Yosakoi is an energetic dance style from Kochi, Japan. It combines traditional dance movements with modern music. Today, Ito will perform Heiwa for You and Me, or Heiwa for short. It was choreographed by a group called Yosakoi 8. The music was composed by Furuchina Rhythm. It's a gift to Yosakoi lovers around the world so that we don't lose out to COVID-19, and we all continue looking forward to a bright new tomorrow.
Heiwa for you and me. Kamae!
髪の色違えど営む日々違えどこの空はいつも一つだけ県民不罰不器用模様心すり減るはまるたいこっちの情も変え行きたいや Hey you, hey me, hey wow 世界とのその時よさこい節は夏を呼んだ踊れ踊れ心のままに月の名所へ思い馳せ歌え歌えあなたを思って魂燃え尽きるまで叫べ叫べ素晴らしき日々月の名所へ届くように心に書き留めた記憶は永遠に枯れることなく Hey you Hey me Hey wow Hey you Hey me Hey wow
ありがとうございました。
Well, if that doesn't chase the blues away, I don't know what will. Thank you very much, Ito Yosakoi.
That was a great performance. I almost got up to start dancing before I realized then you would know I'm wearing sweats. Turning to a more serious note now, we'd like to bring your attention to the good work being done by members of Campaign for Justice, Redress Now for Japanese Latin Americans. Grace Shimizu explains how Japanese Latin Americans taken hostage during World War II are still trying to get reparations from the US government.
Today, our redress update will focus on last year's Inter-American Commission on Human Rights ruling in favor of the Shibayama brothers' petition for justice. We'll start with a brief video clip with an overview of our Japanese Latin American wartime history and redress struggle. Next, we'll share why the decision by the Commission is a significant milestone. And then we'll wrap up with what are the next steps for our ongoing struggle for truth and justice.
Art Shibayama was just 13 years old and living comfortably in Peru when he was forced out of the only home he had ever known. During World War II, the United States government, in collaboration with several Latin American countries, orchestrated the forced removal and internment of over 2,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, which included both citizens of 13 Latin American countries as well as Japanese immigrants. Like young Art Shibayama, the vast majority were Japanese Peruvians. Shortly after the Japanese military attack on Pearl Harbor, community leaders were scapegoated and rounded up for detention throughout the Americas. In Peru, a blacklist had been generated. While not based on any real or credible evidence of Japanese subversive activity, the blacklist targeted businessmen, community leaders, and educators. In collaboration with Peruvian officials, the U.S. used the blacklist as the basis for rounding up hostages. These hostages were then to be traded for Americans held by Japan. Most of the Japanese Latin Americans were interned in a Department of Justice camp at Crystal City, Texas. But for Art and the other internees, their long ordeal did not end with the close of World War II. The remaining Japanese Latin Americans were told that they were illegal aliens and would be deported. And because the Latin American governments initially refused to allow these internees to return, over 1,000 were thus deported to war-devastated Japan. In an effort to call attention to their hidden history and to support efforts for redress, the Campaign for Justice was formed. In response to public pressure, the Department of Justice offered a settlement of only $5,000 each, just 1/4 of the $20,000 redress provided to the Japanese Americans. While supporting the decision of those who accepted the settlement, Art Shibayama, along with several others, chose to opt out of the settlement. He then filed his own lawsuit, preferring to fight for both redress and a full disclosure of the violations committed by the United States during World War II. Despite his efforts, Art was once again denied justice. His case was dismissed in the final months of 2002.
This is really a groundbreaking decision of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. It affirms the claims of Japanese Latin Americans who have struggled for justice for 75 years and reaffirms the obligations of the United States government to provide both access to information about and meaningful, quote, material and moral redress for longstanding violations of human rights.
I'm Becky Shibayama, and I am the daughter of Art Shibayama. On behalf of the Shibayama family and other Japanese Latin American families, we thank you for your support, and we share this milestone victory with you. Unfortunately, this victory is bittersweet since the decision was not made during my father's lifetime. Needless to say, it is extremely aggravating and disappointing that the U.S. government still has not acknowledged nor provided proper reparations for the war crimes committed against our family and over 2,200 Japanese Latin Americans. We would also like to acknowledge the thousands of men, women, and children of German, Italian, Jewish, and Japanese ancestry from Latin America and the U.S., including U.S. citizens who are imprisoned and used in the hostage exchanges. Until there is proper redress and justice, these crimes against humanity are ongoing. The Shibayama family stands in solidarity with all groups and communities currently fighting racial oppression. Our hope is that the published ruling can help lead to no more government-orchestrated kidnappings, indefinite detention, family separation, forced deportations, and no more children in today's detention camps.
You can help. Please sign our petition to bring the Biden administration to the table to discuss redress and reparations in compliance with the Commission's decision. Mobilize your family and friends to sign our petition. Volunteer with the Campaign for Justice or the Japanese Peruvian Oral History Project. Preserve and make history with us. And of course, all donations are welcome. Please stay in touch by following on our website and social media. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace, for that update. We'll be displaying the organization's website again at the end of the program so you can help support its efforts. Now for the presentation of the Clifford Ueda Award.
Dr. Clifford I. Ueda was a San Francisco pediatrician and human rights activist who helped lead the fight for redress as the national president of the Japanese American Citizens League. Dr. Ueda courageously spoke out and acted upon human rights. In 2004, the year following his death, the Bay Area Day of Remembrance Consortium created the Dr. Clifford I. Ueda Peace and Humanitarian Award in his honor. It is awarded in recognition of courageous leadership and dedication to the principles of peace and social justice.
This year's award goes to Campaign for Justice, Redress Now for Japanese Latin Americans. Presenting the award is last year's recipient, Chizu Omori, who is honored for her continued activism in support of Japanese Americans and communities of color. At 91 years old, she still participates at detention center protests with Tsudu for Solidarity.
On behalf of the Day of Remembrance Committee, it's my great pleasure to present the Clifford Ueda Peace and Humanitarian Award to the organization Campaign for Justice. Campaign for Justice has undertaken the difficult work of getting our government to acknowledge the great wrong that was done to Latin American Japanese during World War II and to redress that wrong. Accepting this award is Becky Shibayama, daughter of Art Shibayama, who was one of the most steadfast fighters in this cause. She accompanied her father at the IACHR hearing in Washington, D.C., and has been a longtime activist in Campaign for Justice. She is committed to carry on her father's fight to hold the U.S. government accountable and to end the recurrence of similar violations of fundamental human rights.
Thank you so much, Chizu. It is a special privilege to receive this award from you. I have been a longtime admirer of your documentary, Rabbit in the Moon, your writings, and your dedicated activism. Congratulations on receiving the award in 2020. On behalf of the Campaign for Justice, Redress Now for Japanese Latin Americans, it is a great honor to receive the Clifford Ueda Peace and Humanitarian Award. Clifford Ueda was a dedicated champion for social justice and human rights and a loyal supporter for JLA redress. Thus, this award is very meaningful for our organization. The Campaign for Justice would like to acknowledge the San Francisco DOR for being one of the first Day of Remembrances to include Japanese Latin Americans and the Crystal City internment camp in your program. Thank you to the Bay Area DOR Consortium for your steadfast support for our JLA redress struggle through your annual invitations to provide CFJ updates and participate in the candle lighting ceremony. It has meant and continues to mean so much to be included as an integral part of this significant commemoration, which uplifts remembrance of our Nikkei community's wartime experience and advocates activism for redress and government accountability. Today, we also give thanks to our Japanese Latin American internee elders who helped us to survive those years of war and resettlement. We thank them for nurturing our sense of identity, culture, history, and community. We hold in high esteem our JLA elders who courageously defended our rights under the Geneva Convention while imprisoned in the concentration camps. We honor our Japanese Peruvian Issei and Nisei who bravely broke the silence and testified for us at the 1982 Commission hearings and in U.S. courtrooms, Congressional Committee hearings, and International Commission hearings. We are also indebted to those who repeatedly relived their wartime trauma as they spoke at press conferences and events and gave oral history interviews to expose and preserve our suppressed history. We express heartfelt appreciation to Grace Shimizu, the founder and director of Campaign for Justice and the Japanese Peruvian Oral History Project, for her leadership grounded in the indivisibility of justice and solidarity, and for her resolute perseverance, unabated tenacity, and lasting commitment. Truly, it is because of the vision, activism, and inspiration of our JLA internees and families, and our wonderful volunteers and supporters, those of you who are with us today, and those who have passed but remain in our hearts, that the Campaign for Justice is receiving this award today. This incredible award gives us the strength to carry on. While the Campaign for Justice celebrates last year's long-awaited favorable ruling, there is still work to be done to convince the U.S. government to comply. To pay the reparations owed to Japanese Latin Americans, to provide full disclosure and educational funds, and to end the recurrence of such violations of fundamental human rights. Governments must fully understand their past violations in order to stop repeating them. We must help establish laws and societal structures that protect us all. We must keep at the forefront of our minds the understanding that a society which is not just for all is not safe for anyone. Let us unite and promote and protect human rights in the United States and abroad. Imagine the bright future we can build if we each carry a light for justice. Thank you.
Congratulations to Campaign for Justice, Redress Now for Japanese Latin Americans. And thank you to Becky Shibayama and all your colleagues for your continued efforts to secure reparations and redress.
The annual candle lighting ceremony is the centerpiece of our Day of Remembrance observance. It is a way to commemorate and remember the people unjustly incarcerated by the American government during World War II. For fourth generation Yonsei like me, that would be my grandparents and great-grandparents. For third generation Sansei like Diane, that would be her parents and grandparents. The candle lighting structure was created by George Iwao, a former incarceree and member of the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations, who passed away in 1992. There are 11 candles, one representing each of the 10 War Relocation Authority camps. The center candle represents the 9 Department of Justice camps, including Crystal City, Texas, where most of the Japanese, Latin Americans, and some persons of German and Italian descent from the United States and Latin America were unjustly held.
The theme for this year's Day of Remembrance commemoration is Abolition, Reparations, Carrying the Light for Justice. This year's candle lighters reflect the work that's being done by organizations and individuals actively working to protect civil liberties and immigrant rights, the abolition of inequity and racism, as well as the fight for reparations for our Black brothers and sisters. These candle lighters represent all of us, carrying the light for justice. We will start with the purification ceremony led by the ministers of the Concord Church of San Francisco, and the ceremony will end with a benediction by ministers from the Japanese American Religious Federation and the Reverend Arnold Townsend.
Ichido Haire, let us clap our hands 4 times together. Reading of the Day of Remembrance Blessing Prayer by the head officiant.
Dear Divine Universal Parent Kami-sama, we are gathered here in your person and virtually before your altar at the Concord Church of San Francisco for this 42nd San Francisco Bay Area Day of Remembrance to express our deepest heartfelt gratitude for all our blessings that sustain our precious gift of life and for this opportunity to honor and remember loved ones who experienced a grave injustice, endured unspeakable loss and suffering, and were forcibly detained during World War II. Please allow the precious symbolism of the candle lighting ceremony and special candle lighters chosen each year provide comfort, facilitate the healing, the reconciliation process, growth and empowerment for the former incarcerees, their families, the new wave of unjustly incarcerated and separated adults and children, and for the African American community's struggles for basic human rights in the face of systemic racism that we are reflecting on today, in common with the Japanese American community's struggles. Dear Divine Parent, please bless those who were laid to rest with spiritual peace and happiness, and may we in our physical form, including the generations to come, be blessed with good health and a peaceful, joyful, loving, harmonious life, one with you.
Please bow your heads. Let us purify our hearts by letting go of our negative thoughts and emotions. Thank you. Let us wholeheartedly feel Kami-sama's blessings.
Lighting the center candle in remembrance of those incarcerated in Department of Justice internment camps and U.S. Army facilities is Libya Yamamoto. Libya was born in Chiclayo, Peru. During World War II, at age 7, she and her family were among 2,264 persons of Japanese ancestry who were abducted from 13 Latin American nations and imprisoned in U.S. concentration camps for use as hostages in 2 exchanges for U.S. citizens held by Japan. Libya is a founding member of the Japanese-Peruvian Oral History Project and Campaign for Justice, Redress Now for Japanese Latin Americans. They continue to educate the public about this hidden wartime history and the ongoing struggle for proper redress for these war crimes and crimes against humanity perpetuated by the U.S. government. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 7,318 Nikkei incarcerated at the Amachi concentration camp in Colorado is Tomio Hayase Izu. Born and raised in San Jose, Tomio Hayase Izu has been involved with the San Jose Nikkei Resistors since 2018, which aims to mobilize the Japanese American community in defense of civil liberties and social justice for all. He is currently working to build support for H.R. 40. Quote, "We understand that reparations are more than just a symbolic gesture. They represent a meaningful path forward to reconciliation and restorative justice. We recognize that the call for African American reparations is long overdue, and are committed to supporting the Black community in their struggle for social and economic justice, as well as fighting for increased education about history of slavery and the legacy of racial discrimination." Unquote. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 13,348 Nikkei incarcerated at the Gila River concentration camp in Arizona is James King. James King is the state campaigner for the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. Prior to joining the organization, James worked to build recognition of the value of people who are being held in carceral spaces. James is also a writer and organizer, having written numerous op-eds and a weekly blog that gave a first-person perspective of the true impact of mass criminalization and living within the prison industrial complex. His current policy interests include decarceration and improving the living conditions for incarcerated people, with the ultimate goal of creating alternatives to incarceration based upon investing in under-resourced communities. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 10,767 Nikkei incarcerated at the Heart Mountain concentration camp in Wyoming is Dr. Amy Iwasaki Mass. Dr. Mass is Professor Emerita at Whittier College, where she taught for 25 years. She was born and raised in Los Angeles, except for the years she spent in Heart Mountain, Wyoming, from age 7 to 10, where she lived with her family in 19B. She has been a social worker for 60 years. Dr. Mass has made numerous presentations and published many articles about the psychological impact of the concentration camp experience on Japanese Americans, including At Home in 19B in Nikkei Heritage Spring 2004, and Psychological Effects of Internment in A Matter of Conscience Essays of World War II Draft Resistance Movement 2002. She continues to speak at Day of Remembrance events at universities and recently appeared in a video about her 1981 testimony before the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 8,497 Nikkei incarcerated at the Jerome concentration camp in Arkansas is Salim Shehadeh. Salim Shehadeh is currently a PhD student at UCLA studying Palestinian student organizing, and he works with the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diasporas, AMED, studies program at San Francisco State University. He started organizing as a student during his undergrad with Students for Justice in Palestine at UC Davis, and went on to organize with the General Union of Palestine Students, GUPS, during his master's while at SFSU. Since 2016, he has worked with AMED director Dr. Rabab Abulhadi on annual commemoration of the Day of Remembrance with Asian American Studies and community leaders Grace Shimizu and Pastor Michael Yoshi. In 2019, AMED studies were invited to the Crystal City pilgrimage, which Salim participated in. He works with faculty, students, and the community at SFSU to teach and learn about Palestine, as well as to put a check on pro-Israel pressures on the university to dismantle the program. He helped lead efforts to defend against lawsuits at SFSU directed at Dr. Abulhadi, which attempted to undermine and censor her work. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 10,046 Nikkei incarcerated at the Manzanar concentration camp in California is Kim Miyoshi. Kim Miyoshi was born in Los Angeles, California to Kunio and Marlene Miyoshi. Her father's family was incarcerated at Manzanar in California, and her mother's family was incarcerated at Poston in Arizona. She lives in Oakland, California with her husband and two black Nikkei daughters. Ms. Miyoshi is a co-founder of the JA activist group NOSE in the late 90s, who organized a peace protest in Japantown in San Francisco 4 days after 9/11 to denounce targeting and scapegoating Muslim and Arab communities. She co-founded the largest progressive educational justice coalition in Oakland, with community and labor working together to achieve racial justice and equity for Black, brown, and highest needs students. Drawing on her own family history of receiving reparations, she currently supports the campaign for reparations for Black students in Oakland Unified. She is a co-founder of Japanese Americans for Justice and organizer of the Suru Rising Vigil at the former Tanforan Assembly Center site where 8,000 Japanese Americans were detained during World War II. The vigil was organized in honor of George Floyd, ICE detainees, and all people whose lives were stolen by racism and state violence. She cites her bachan as the inspiration for her activism. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 9,397 Nikkei incarcerated at the Minidoka concentration camp in Idaho is Ellen Bepp. Ellen Bepp began her artistic journey striving to give voice to her Japanese cultural roots through visual and musical expression. Born and raised in the San Jose, Japantown community shortly after World War II, her family had returned from their incarceration at Heart Mountain, Wyoming. As a sansei growing up in the 1950s and 60s, exposure to the civil rights struggle spurred her to become involved in the Asian American political and cultural movement. In the 1970s, she began expressing her Asian American identity as a taiko musician and eventually a visual artist as well. Her artwork addresses issues of social and racial injustice, such as the World War II Japanese American incarceration and the ongoing violence against Black, brown, and indigenous people. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 17,814 Nikkei incarcerated at the Poston concentration camp in Arizona is William Bill Sato. William Bill Sato was born in the Poston, Arizona World War II concentration camp. After camp, Bill's family settled in the Boyle Heights section of Los Angeles. After college in the Bay Area, Bill embarked on a 32-year teaching career in Asian American Studies and U.S. history. Bill was a founding member of the National Coalition for Redress and Reparation, NCRR, a grassroots organization that helped empower grassroots Japanese Americans to fight for the formerly incarcerated Japanese. He was active in the 1983 winning of redress payments from Alameda County to 7 former Alameda County Japanese American employees fired at the beginning of World War II because of their race. Bill also supported the redress campaign for Japanese Latin Americans. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 8,475 Nikkei incarcerated at the Rower concentration camp in Arkansas is Supervisor Shaman Walton. Supervisor Shaman Walton was born in San Francisco and lived in public housing at an early age in Bayview and Potrero Hill. He has worked in District 10 neighborhoods for decades and has witnessed firsthand the challenges our community faces, from longtime residents being pushed out of the city to losing childhood friends to violence and incarceration. As the former president and member of the San Francisco Board of Education, Shaman spearheaded the effort to close the achievement gap for Black, Latino, and special needs students, and helped secure the funding for the school district's first African American Achievement and Leadership Initiative. Shaman is passionate about quality public education, options for living wage jobs, safer neighborhoods, affordable housing, support services for the homeless, and universal health care. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 8,130 Nikkei incarcerated at the Topaz concentration camp in Utah is Ruth Ichinaga. Ruth Ichinaga was 7 years old when she and her family were removed to the Tanforan Assembly Center. At the time, her Issei parents had a small neighborhood grocery store in Berkeley. They were later incarcerated at Topaz, Utah, where they remained until the end of the war. In 2005, she traveled to Cuba with a group to participate in a cultural exchange and interview project of Japanese Cubans to explore the history of their incarceration during World War II and their broader Japanese-Cuban experience. From 2008 to 2014, Ruth danced with Purple Moon's dance projects When Dreams Are Interrupted. Each site-specific performance incorporated local Japanese-American community stories. At meeting at the Tule Lake Pilgrimage, Purple Moon Dance Project was invited to perform with Wendy Maruyama's Tag Project. Since 1998, Ruth has served on the board of Japanese American Women Alumni of UC Berkeley. She has volunteered at the Sakura Kai Senior Center for the last 19 years teaching taiko. Ruth feels privileged and honored to light a candle in order to continue to remember our history and to stand firm in solidarity with others, lending our voice of support and alliance to prevent this from happening to others and to continue the fight against injustices that continue to happen today. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 18,789 Nikkei incarcerated at the Tule Lake concentration camp in California is Brandon Kwan. Brandon Kwan is the operations manager for the Japantown Community Benefit District and an administrative assistant for the Japantown Task Force. He was born and raised in San Francisco. Previously, Brandon enlisted in the U.S. Army Military Intelligence Corps, assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, MEC, at Fort Stewart, Georgia, with several overseas deployments. To learn more about his family's incarceration in Tule Lake and Crystal City, among others, Brandon attended the 2018 Tule Lake pilgrimage and the 2019 Crystal City pilgrimage. He ultimately joined the Tule Lake Pilgrimage Committee as a volunteer. To honor the courage and determination of those people unjustly incarcerated by the United States government during World War II, in memory of those who today are experiencing violations of their civil and human rights, we now observe a moment of silence. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm the Reverend Deborah Lowe Skinner. I'm the vicar of Christ Episcopal Church, Seiko Kai, and also the president of the Japanese American Religious Federation. We will be offering prayers from various faith leaders. I will be representing the Christian tradition. The Reverend Takahito Hayashi of the Tenriko America West Church will be representing the independent tradition. The Reverend Henry Adams, supervising minister of the Buddhist Church of San Francisco, will be representing the Buddhist tradition, and executive director Michael Pappas will be representing the San Francisco Interfaith Council. You know, in the Christian tradition, in many of our hymnals, there is this popular hymn that is actually sung to an African American spiritual tune. It proclaims, "In Christ there is no east or west, in him no south or north, but one great fellowship of love throughout the whole wide earth." As lovely as those sentiments are, we in the Japanese American community and in the communities of African American, Latinx, Indigenous, and other people of color know that that ideal of a fellowship of love often has not been practiced or achieved throughout the history of this country. We have experienced exclusion, segregation, enslavement, exploitation, unjust incarceration, and violence of all kinds. Over the decades and centuries, those who have suffered have longed hoped for equality, justice, apology, and reparations. They have yearned like the biblical prophet Amos that, quote, "justice would roll on like a river and righteousness flow like a never-failing stream," unquote. Those who have suffered have long prayed, like the biblical prophet Isaiah, quote, "may the Lord continually guide us and satisfy our souls that are in scorched and dry places, and give us strength to our bones. In the divisions and inequalities among us, may good people, guided by Jesus Christ's way of love, peace, reconciliation, strive to be repairers of the breach and restorers of the streets in which we dwell," unquote. Eventually, in the Japanese American community, after many petitions, lawsuits, and congressional hearings, the survivors of the 120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II in the 10 concentration camps that were scattered around the United States, they did receive a formal apology from the federal government in 1976, and later $20,000 in reparations for each survivor in 1982. Others, such as our African American brothers and sisters, also seek a formal apology and formal reparations. Their prayers are well summed up in this litany for those not ready for healing, written by Dr. Yolanda Pierce, who is the Dean of the Howard University School of Divinity. She wrote, "Let us not rush to the language of healing before understanding the fullness of the injury and the depth of the wound. Let us not rush to offer a Band-Aid when the gaping wound requires surgery and complete reconstruction. Let us not offer false equivalencies, thereby diminishing the particular pain felt in a particular circumstance in a particular historic moment. Let us not speak of reconciliation without speaking of reparations and restoration, or how we can repair the breach and how we can restore the loss. Let us not value a false peace over a righteous justice. Let us not be afraid to sit with ugliness, the messiness, and the pain that is in life of community together. Instead, let us mourn Black and Brown and Asian men and women who have been killed unjustly or died because of unequal distribution of economic resources, medical care, and vaccines. Let us be humble and listen to the pain, rage, and grief pouring from the lips of our neighbors and friends. And let us pray with our eyes open and our feet firmly planted on the ground as we pray, God, in your mercy, show us our own complicity in injustice, convict us for our indifference, forgive us when we have remained silent, equip us with zeal for righteousness, never let us grow accustomed or claim to unrighteousness. Let us walk together and support one another in Jesus' way of love and reconciliation. Amen.
Hello, my name is Takahiko Hayashi, and I represent the Tendikyo faith. I am deeply honored to be able to deliver a message on behalf of the independent faith traditions of the Japanese American Religious Federation. We all have stories to tell about ourselves, the lives we've led, the good moments and the difficult times. Stories are the way we make sense of the world and give ourselves a sense of direction as we look to the future. In our Tendikyo faith, we believe that the best story that we can tell is a story grounded in the belief that, quote, all people of the world are brothers and sisters. There should be no one called an outsider. This is Ofudesaki, part 13, verse 43. When we seek to tell our individual stories grounded in this truth, our stories will find a way to interweave with each other. Our stories will find ways to strengthen and support each other, as brothers and sisters always do, particularly in those moments in our stories when we find ourselves at a loss. And if we seek to tell our stories in the belief that there should be no one called an outsider, then our stories will reach out to everyone, making sure to give voice and a story to all people. And through these stories being brought together, we can then begin to find a sense of direction to the future based in the pursuit of the joyous life for everyone. Having said that, I can only state my full respect and admiration to the many people who have worked so hard to continue this day of remembrance, for I believe that it resonates so strongly with God's intent for us. I would like to offer my humble prayer to God to continue to inspire and to empower everyone who seek to tell over and over again the stories of our collective humanity and the efforts to overcome the challenges and the adversity that we face. May these stories become the foundation of our society so that we can all, as brothers and sisters, live the joyous life for which God the Parent created human beings and the world. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Reverend Henry Adams, Supervising Minister of the Buddhist Church of San Francisco, and I'm honored to participate in today's Day of Remembrance. I'd like to share with you, as we remember this day, an excerpt from the diaries of Reverend Daisho Tana. Reverend Tana was detained on March 13th, 1942, and on March 14th, was put on a truck bound for an old civilian conservation corps camp in the mountains east of Los Angeles. He writes the following on March 22nd, 1942. I do not care to get up in front of a crowd of people and promote Buddhism. However, today is the spring equinox, so the various Buddhist sects decided to come together this evening for an Ohigan service. We hung a painted image of Amida Buddha in C block and chanted the Junidai, the 12 praises of Amida Buddha, all together. Gathered in the hall that was full to capacity, I was filled with emotion to be observing this year's Ohigan service in such an unexpected place. Having been tasked with giving the Dharma talk at the Ohigan service, I entitled my talk, Our Ohigan, and spoke about the ideals we might aspire to as people being held prisoner. I was encouraged when Pastor Izumi from a Christian congregation in Santa Barbara said it was a good sermon. Pastor Nakane also said he enjoyed the way my voice carries when I speak. It is a great thing when a person is able to respond to the words of someone who holds a different point of view with frank words of appreciation. As I reflect on the words of the Junidai, which they chanted that night at the Tuna Canyon camp, I find that the following verse expresses the wisdom and strength that sustained Reverend Tana in those difficult times. Shomu jomu gato 야근요 시간된 요로 이슈세포 묘지 고가 초라입니다 송. All things are impermanent and non-substantial, like the moon in the water, a lightning flash, or the dew. For all beings, the Buddha expounds the Dharma that cannot be expressed in words. Therefore, I pay homage to Amida Buddha, the most honored one. Namandabutsu, 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 namandabutsu. Thank you very much.
Beloved sisters and brothers, on this, the 42nd annual observance of the San Francisco Bay Area Day of Remembrance, I bring to you the presence and prayers of our city's 800 communities of faith and religious institutions. For over 3 decades, the San Francisco Interfaith Council has brought together people of different faiths to celebrate our city's rich and diverse spiritual and religious traditions, to build understanding, and to serve our community. Today, we once again stand in solidarity with our Japanese American sisters and brothers to remind the world of the injustice human beings are capable of committing toward one another. In particular, the forced relocation and incarceration in internment camps of over 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry by the United States government, most of whom lived on our Pacific Coast shores. In his famed play, The Tempest, William Shakespeare wrote, "What is past is prologue," thus reminding us of the importance to not repeat the injustices of the past. Simply not repeating past injustices is not enough, though. To truly be sincere in repentance requires not simply to admit and feel sorry for one's past wrongs, but to make a conscious and radical change of life, thinking, and actions. Today, Japanese Americans stand in solidarity with our Black sisters and brothers as they observe Black History Month, calling for abolition and reparations, thus carrying the light for justice. Abolition and reparations are the true outward expressions of repentance. Here being called for by one community whose justice has been violated on behalf of another. It is only when we stand in such solidarity, to paraphrase Dr. King, that we can play a role in bending the arc of history toward justice. On this solemn observance, let our actions express our faith, and may the Greater One, in whom we believe and to whom we entreat, continue to inspire, strengthen, and comfort us as we journey on the road together, seeking to be instruments of ultimate justice. Amen.
God, we thank you for this time that you have allowed us to spend together. We pray now that all of our discussion, deliberation, and interaction will bear much fruit, that will cause our people to become better, that will increase the potential and the reality of fairness and righteousness in our society. We pray now that you would bless this beloved community in the name of the God of all comfort. Amen.
Thank you to our ministers and our candlelighters. You know, I've been to many of these candle lighting ceremonies in person, and I know we all like to complain about Zoom conferences and Zoom webinars, but I've got to tell you, it was so powerful to see the candle lighting ceremony in person and such an intimate look, and to hear so clearly the contributions of the people who were selected to do the candle lighting. It was also beautifully produced, and I want to give credit to Melissa Bailey Nihei, Max Nihei, Greg Villoria, and Carrie Matsumura, who all worked really hard to shoot those wonderful scenes and to put them together in such an exquisite way. Much gratitude to everyone who participated in this 42nd Day of Remembrance, and especially to all the volunteers. And a special thanks to our sponsors, San Francisco Japantown Foundation, the San Francisco chapter of the JCL in memory of Greg Maritani, the San Francisco Grants for the Arts, Union Bank San Francisco branch, members of the National Japanese American Historical Society, the Bay Area Day of Remembrance Consortium, and individuals in our community.
Also, thank you to Francis Wong for the music that he provided. We hope that the speakers you've heard tonight have motivated and inspired you to take action to help make our world a better place. Here's information on how you can follow up. You can visit the Sudo for Solidarity website for more information on the 2 March events that Lisa Doi mentioned. And to submit testimony in support of HR 40, please email it no later than this Sunday, February 21st, to sudoforsolidarity@gmail.com. You can also get more guidance and instructions on how to craft and submit your testimony at sudoforsolidarity.org/HR-40.
To secure reparations for Japanese Latin Americans, visit the JLA Campaign for Justice website and click on the What You Can Do tab. Some of the actions that you can take include signing a petition to President Joe Biden and his administration, urging compliance with international law and reparations to Japanese Latin Americans, serving as a volunteer, or bringing a speaker to your group to teach people about this little-known chapter in our country's history.
Locally, in San Francisco's Fillmore District is an opportunity for you to help strengthen ties and support our Black neighbors. This Sunday, February 21st, from noon to 4 p.m., Japantown for Justice will be hosting the Fillmore Marketplace Black Equity Edition, where you can support Black-owned restaurants and small businesses that have been severely impacted by the pandemic. This event provides an opportunity to not only support Black-owned businesses, but to strengthen the connection between our local Japantown and Fillmore communities, which is an ongoing effort by J4J. If you would like to learn more about HR 40, which would establish a commission to study the consequences of slavery and to create proposals for reparations, you can contact the American Civil Liberties Union and find out how to participate in their letter writing campaign to your local congressperson.
If you're interested in building support for HR 40 in the Japanese American community, contact Tomio Hayase Izu, who's the chair of the San Jose Nikkei Resistors HR 40 committee at sj.nikkeiresistors@gmail.com. San Jose Nikkei Resistors are in the process of developing an outreach tool to conduct education around why support reparations for African Americans is so important. And if you weren't able to take down all this information that we've been giving you, after the program, we're going to be displaying all the contact information on a loop. You can also go to the website and the Facebook page for the National Japanese American Historical Society, abbreviated to NJAHS. That's NJAHS.org for a listing.
Thank you to the 400 people for joining us this evening. As Reverend Townsend said, we are responsible for the abolition of racism and the passage of reparations in this country. On this day of remembrance, remember that we can all carry the light for justice. That concludes our program tonight. Before we end, I'd like to give a shout out to Jerry Nakano, my dad, and Diane's husband, and Lindsay Nakano, Diane's other daughter, who has supported the Diane and Hillary show for decades now. Thank you and have a good night.